You're listening to Therapy for Your Money, a podcast about all things money and finance for therapy practice owners. If you want to feel confident and in control of your financial life, then you've come to the right spot. I'm your host, Julie Harris. I'm an accountant and the owner of Green Oak Accounting. My firm specializes in working with private practices across the U.S., and my team and I have worked with hundreds of private practice owners. I'm on a mission to share all the best practices I've learned along the way because I want you to have a profitable private practice. My new book, Profit First for Therapists, is available at most online retailers. You can get it in paperback, audiobook, or ebook as well. Go check it out. Hello, and welcome to Therapy for Your Money. Today we are talking marketing with the one and only Joshua Brummel. Joshua is the founder of Therapy Flow, an agency that provides done-for-you marketing services to therapists in private practice. So, Joshua, hi, nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me in and having this conversation. I'm excited.
Me too. And we just happened to see each other at a live event very recently. And so it's always nice to chat where we had much longer conversations around marketing. But today our conversation is for our listeners, for the therapists. And so we wanted to talk through some ways to think about marketing, which before we started recording, I mentioned like for my team and I, right, it's one line item on the profit and loss, but you think about marketing in a much, much deeper way. So I kind of wanted to bridge the gap between those two
Yeah.
and talk through that. So tell me, like, how do you approach that conversation of how much should I spend on marketing?
Yeah. To lay the groundwork to this conversation, I'd really put marketing in two and then three categories. There's what I'd say is infrastructure. That's things that you probably spend on once or put time into every once in a while. So that's building a website or
Okay.
writing your listing site profile or creating a intake page initially for your process. Those are things that we're doing one time. Maybe they need updates every couple months or every couple of years, but we're not spending on a new website every month, right?
Right.
And then the second type of marketing spend is activities, team members that we're spending money on to do marketing, ad budget like Google Ads, search engine optimization activities, other things like that. That's ongoing spend. Our $30 to site today, a budget line item that's monthly versus a one-time spend. Those are kind of two major categories, and how we approach decisions about one or the other unfold from there.
Okay. So long-term assets versus like the short-term marketing spend that once you spend on Google Ads, like that money's gone. You're not getting it
Yeah.
back. Like it does not generate for you next month,
Right.
like your website does. Okay. So one question that I get a lot, and I'm sure you do as well, how much should someone be spending on marketing in a private practice?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard you quote this number. This is the number that we quote, like the Small Business Administration for just any businesses, so that somewhere between like 8 and 10% of revenue should probably be going towards your overall marketing budget. That could look like ads, that could look like infrastructure costs or team members doing marketing, whatever it is. That's a okay rule of thumb for a lot of practices. It ends up being less than that because they get a lot of word of mouth referrals, which is really helpful. And so that this is where a recommendation comes in to really talk about it on a per clinician basis. How do we invest in marketing on an ongoing basis based off of our team needs and the type of specific numbers that impact how well our business is doing, which I'm happy to get into.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's unpack all of that.
So there's three numbers we should really care about. Our cost per lead.
Mm-hmm.
We can look at this by channel. If you spend $30 a month on Psychology Today and you get one person reaching out to you from Psychology Today, that's a lead. It costs you $30 to get that lead. If you spend $1,000 on Google Ads and 30 people reached out to you, I think that's like a $30 cost per lead.
Mm-hmm.
Big.
33 in that ballpark.
33.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that, a lot of it, you could look up every dollar, just that line item that you spend on marketing, investment, time, infrastructure, and just essentially divide it by total number of leads that you got that month, that year, that quarter, and kind of get me like, oh, it generally costs me $40 or $12 or whatever it is to get a lead in my door. And that's kind of the starting number. And it's very back of the napkin math. But then we could say, hey, if I want 40 more leads a month, then this is probably vaguely what it's going to take to get there. And so that's option one, is to just look at what's our average lead cost. If I want more leads, then let's take our average cost and spend more to get more based off of our current experience.
Yeah. And you're considering a lead to be either someone who calls or someone who submits your online form. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would never consider a lead a click, a view, a whistle, a breath of a look, which some marketers do. But yeah, a name, email, phone number, phone call, like a physical person filling out the form or on a call with our team member, a concrete person.
Okay. So I'm a big fan when it comes to marketing spend. I love back of the napkin math, right? So you spent $1,000, you got 100 leads, that would be $10 per lead on average. But
Yeah.
then when, like, if that number were to double from one month to the other, then I think you can't back of the napkin anymore. You've got to go like deeper and say, okay, what about Psychology Today? What about Google
Yeah.
Ads? What about Facebook? Like, what is your philosophy there?
Yeah. So as we're starting to try and not just on average figure out what we need to invest in marketing, but then we actually say, where should we invest first?
Okay.
It's really helpful to look at the channel or the marketing process we're going to invest in. So if we right now are spending $1,000 on Google Ads a month and we want more leads from Google, we probably want to look at our lead costs, not just from all sources, but from Google to estimate it out using something like a HIPAA compliant CRM, which is a product that we provide to all of our clients. Or, you can still get some of this from tracking spreadsheets, and otherwise it just takes a little bit of work, or your Google Ads manager. You just want to look at and track it specific to your source that you're about to put more dollars in to really know what your costs are going to be there in that channel.
Okay. So that was number one. Really,
Yeah.
number one was cost per lead. What's the second number to know?
Cost to acquire one client. This is a downstream number. This is called CAC, cost to acquisition, like client cost. And what that means is for every, let's say, 3 leads we get, 1 converts into a client. If we're spending $33 per lead, right? It's $100 per new client that we're bringing in. What this really can do is you get downstream, great. That tells us how much we're going to make from session 1. It takes me $100 to get someone in the door and we charge our $130 a session. It's probably a pretty good trade, especially once they show up to session 2 and session 5.
Right.
And so now with a little bit more confidence, we can see, oh, when I spend money on marketing, my money comes back to me in session 1 or session 3 or session 5. And unless we ask how much is it actually costing us to acquire the clients and not just lead cost, it's hard to have confidence to spend more on marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so when you're looking at the cost of client acquisition, does client retention or average client retention for that practice play a role here?
Certainly. And so that's where for a team that has a lot of interns or associates,
Yeah.
your retention rates on clients probably aren't going to be as high, which means that you would have people leaving or churning out of the practice that maybe would have stuck there longer with higher quality of care. You might not be able to fix that, but that does impact how much you might be willing to spend to acquire a client. Or if you're a cash pay practice and you charge $250 a session, versus you're an insurance in-network practice that only gets a $120 or a $90 reimbursement rate, that affects how much you can spend to acquire clients compared to someone else. And so it's really important to think through that because it will affect fast or how aggressive you are spending money on marketing.
And do you notice a big difference between the cost of acquisition in an insurance practice versus a cash pay practice?
Yes. So typically you're going to spend almost double to acquire a cash pay client than acquire an in-network client. There's two reasons for that. Number one is there's no magic population out there raising their hand saying, I want to pay cash for therapy services.
Right.
There's lots of people who will do it, but it's hard to like target other than on quality of care and brand and like sort of attract them. And so you kind of like get a lot of people looking for in network. So you generate more leads that don't burn. But then it goes the other way. As you're in network, you can usually work with more people. So you get less sales or intake friction. So it lowers the costs
Right.
to get more clients in the door.
Right. And so it's more expensive also because usually need more leads in a
Yeah.
cash pay practice, right? You won't convert at the same rate typically
Right.
as a private pay or as an
Yeah.
insurance practice. Okay. What other number is important to know on the marketing
Yeah.
side?
And this is where I highly recommend you come up with an average amount on a monthly basis you want to spend per clinician on your team. Kind of like a basement floor, so to speak, of we will always spend at least X amount of dollars per clinician on our team. Most of you are probably spending at least $30 a month if you're paying for all of your clinicians' psychology today.
Right. Yeah. Which is
So
kind
if
of
you're already
common practice, right? Like that makes usually that makes a lot of sense.
right.
Yeah.
But we could add to that and say, great, every time I hire a clinician, no matter what, I'm also going to up my Google Ads budget by $30 or
Okay.
up my SEO effort by $30 or whatever. And it kind of sometimes is hard because investments aren't as granular. But going back to the earlier percentage rule, to walk through some numbers, you calculate how much revenue would either a part-time, if they're part-time, or full-time, if they're full-time clinician, make your practice.
Mm-hmm.
Make your practice. Let's say they generate $100,000 of revenue for your business or estimated that next year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 10% of that would be $1,000. So we could say, great, let's split that $1,000 right now across the monthly and do that across all of our clinicians. We have 10 clinicians, that's $10,000. We should be at least spending, almost $1,000 a month on marketing, no matter what. But that's almost a per clinician number that is guided by how many clinicians we have on our team, rather than just vaguely how much revenue our business does or some of those pieces.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. You actually, in your newsletter is incredible. I read it every week, and
Yes.
you talked about this topic in a newsletter, which is what prompted me to say, "Hey, Joshua, let's talk about this on the podcast." But do you have a specific recommendation of this is how much you should spend on ads per clinician per month? If you're on cruise control versus if you're filling their caseload, like, do you have
Yeah.
baseline or ranges of recommendations?
I get this from you as an accountant, where you always say it depends, and that's kind of the answer that I have
Yeah.
here too. Is like it depends. Are we in network? Are we in a competitive area? How mature are clinicians? But some generalities. Number one is I see on average you need somewhere between 7 and 10 leads or referrals a month per clinician on your team to keep them full and maybe get a slight growth curve for your entire practice. So if you have 10 full-time clinicians, you probably should be getting about 100 calls a month, maybe give or take. And so that can be a guiding light of, great, how many calls are we getting? How far short are we? Are we at 75% capacity? Why are we there? Often you're actually at like, on average, 3 referrals per clinician on your team or 5 referrals per clinician on your team. And just baseline across the board saying, let's get this average up to 7 or to 8 or to 10 will have a full fill-in effect across the board. And that can be a really helpful on average starting point.
Yeah. That number is fascinating to me. And what an interesting way to think about, like, this is the number that just keeps everyone full, not grows, allows you to grow, right? This
Right.
is just kind of, if everything stays the same just based on average client terminations, like, this is what is going to keep everyone full. That's a really interesting number, but also an interesting way to think about, okay, if we want to hire 3 clinicians, which my team and I get that question all the time. Oh, I put
Right.
out a job ad. There's 2 people I want to hire. Can I do that? We're like, yeah, maybe you can do that, but can you actually
Right.
fill them? Like, do you have the capacity to do that? This formula helps a lot with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
100%. So it's a back of the napkin referral volume, but
Sure.
where I would take this idea a little bit further, especially if you want to hire that new clinician, I'd really recommend listing out all of the infrastructure pieces you would immediately add into or put in place. Hey, we're
Yeah.
gonna get a headshot and a new service page or admin to our website, and that's gonna take 5 admin hours to roll that all out. We can put a number on that. And then we can also say we're going to implement that psychology today. That's $30 a month. We're going to increase Google ad budget. And so what I really want is you to come up with a standard operating procedure or a list of all the actions you're going to take either right before or as soon as you hire that person. You're almost flipping a switch
Okay.
and rolling out the next thing. And you could go down that list and try and figure out how much are each one of these either one-time actions or recurring
Mhm.
actions going to cost us. And then now you have sort of a number on how much it costs you to hire and fill out your clinician. So some of our best practices are like, great, every time we hire a clinician, we spend $1,000 more on Google Ads that next month because we get a mostly full caseload out of that. And now we're kind of treating this exchange of money, marketing money, for a full caseload, which is how we want to simplify our own experience with the practice.
Okay, so you're saying, let's say practice was spending, just to stay full, $1,000 a month. They hire a
Yep.
new clinician. They might want to double that for 1 month to
Right.
get his clinician almost full really quickly, and that is
100%.
effective. Oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting and really helpful. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a really good indication, kind of like inflation. If you keep hiring therapists, but you don't keep reinvesting or increasing the amount that you're spending on marketing each time
Mhm.
you hire. We often see that because you hired because you got a little bit of buzz and then you want to grow faster and then you get some word of mouth referrals and it feels good. And
Yeah.
then you have 17 clinicians and then now you're only at 80% capacity most of the time. You're like, where did I go wrong? It was 2 months ago or 3 years ago where you weren't doing that per clinician increase on marketing and you really made yourself lopsided and it finally showed up to a detriment.
Yeah, and like, on the accounting side, right, getting that last 25% full, that's really where a lot of the profit is, right? If you're just constantly running your team at 80% full, your overhead is exactly the same. The benefits are exactly the same, right? You might be paying your team a little bit less if you're paying per hour or per session, but getting them full can be the difference between, like, barely making a profit and a really profitable practice, which is why this topic is so interesting to me.
And I shared this in my newsletter yesterday, and this is an important number, is often it takes the same amount of money for someone to run a Google ad for $500 a month as it does to run that Google ad for $1,000 a month. So to go back into
Yeah.
back of the napkin math, if you spend $500 for someone to run your Google ad and $500 on the ad spend, we spent $1,000, and that's actually our cost per lead. So if we get only 10 leads, oh, the $100
Yeah.
per. But if we go up to $1,000 a month in ad spend, and that's $500 a month in fixed cost for someone to run the ad stays the same, well, it
Mhm.
actually drops our average cost per lead. And so sometimes for a practice owner, I'd give you the recommendation that if you're willing to invest more in your marketing, you don't just acquire new clients. It actually becomes a lot cheaper to acquire the clients for the same reason why keeping a team at 95% full, you actually earn more money than if you have 75% full because your overhead doesn't change.
Very counterintuitive, but also, I
Like a little frustrating.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes more is less in that sense. Like
Yeah.
spending more means you're paying less. So how do you think about marketing ROI? Is it in a this month only? Is it in the long term? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's both. I do like to look at it on a monthly basis, and then I'd probably say like 6 months and annual. Within that, if I look at every ad dollar I've ever spent in Facebook, for instance, for my own business, the revenue I have clearly brought in is in massive proportion to what I've directly spent.
Sure.
If I look at the ad campaign I launched last week and I didn't get a single lead from it because I was trying something new, I lost money on that.
Right.
So you do have to take a long-term perspective on a 6 to 12 month period of investment. But if you aren't looking at your actions bi-weekly to monthly, especially for blunt things like SEO or Google Ads, then you're probably spending more or you're just not as optimized as you need to be. Psychology Today is a couple $100s a year. If you get one client who does 12 sessions with you, it's going to more than pay for itself. But those 3 months that you didn't get a single referral from it, it feels like you're throwing away $100, right? And so sometimes you have to just ask yourself, what is the length of time that it makes sense to measure something across?
Mm. So that's an interesting one because I see all the time in therapist Facebook groups, someone will say, like probably in a solo practice, I'm throwing away, I'm using air quotes, $30 a month on Psychology Today. I haven't had a single client in 3 months. Shouldn't I
Yeah.
just cancel it? And my thought is always like $30 a month is a really cheap way to put your name out there. Why would you cancel that? But do
Yeah.
you have a different perspective on it?
I think if you know where you're putting that $30 instead, I don't think the lesson ever is spend less money on marketing.
Ooh.
Because I believe that marketing should make your business money. And it doesn't always in the short term. You have to spend money to lose money sometimes. I also don't believe it's just point blank. Like if you spend money, you make money. That if like that rule, I think gets a lot of therapists in trouble with marketing, especially like they're just like, great, let me throw my $500 and hope that just doesn't always work out either. But all to say is if we know where we're putting that $30 instead and it's a strategic choice, great. Otherwise, if that's like your only option, $30 is probably a pretty good starting point.
Okay. Okay. Before we go, I want to ask you if there are any non-traditional, maybe non-Google or Psychology Today ways that practices should be investing their marketing dollars.
Yeah. 3 big recommendations. Number one is email marketing.
Hmm.
So that looks like as soon as someone fills out the form on your website and or all of your client list, we send them a weekly newsletter or we send them some lead email. I still find that most practices aren't doing any kind of lead nurturing. What this
Okay.
does is if we can convert more of the people already reaching out to us or reactivate people who were previously clients or dropped on sessions, we don't have to spend as much money generating new leads. We can continue to
Nice.
recycle and get more value. So it lowers our cost per acquisition, which is great. So email marketing.
Okay.
Number two, I'm getting so more bullish on any size of practice doing heavy networking still. And again, scaling that in proportion to the amount of clinicians you have on your team. And it's one of the best ways to compete with the macro large therapy online platforms because they can't do it. They
Correct.
can't take a community approach. They can't take another provider approach. They just aren't going to do it. And so that's an area where There's a lot of relationships to build and get the value from as a result. And then the last one would be social media. I don't think that a lot of therapists and counselors want to create video content specifically. I understand that most of our practices still don't do it. However, if you can launch a podcast or create a weekly video or do some social content, not like quick little tips and tricks, just some good long-term content that will help overall. And I wish more practice owners were open to doing it to help their practice grow.
Okay. And all three of those are really not very expensive to do.
No.
That's the interesting part. Like they're not free, but pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. This was a fascinating conversation. Every conversation I have with you always is. Thank you, Joshua, for joining me today. If our listeners are
Yeah.
interested, you do some amazing things over at Therapy Flow. So if listeners are interested in working with you or checking out the amazing new CRM that you have, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, 2 places that I'll point you. Julie referenced it, the weekly newsletter that I send. It's free. I put a decent amount of time into it every week, and it's just trending thought tactics. I did an intake guide last week, and then the SEO guide the week before that, and some other things there. So we'll include a link in the show notes. You can also just Google my Therapy Flow newsletter and find it pretty easy. So that's something that you can join right now, whether you ever become a client of ours or not. And then you can also go to mytherapyflow.com, our major website. We have great done for you Google Ad services that get you great results for your marketing dollars and saves you a lot of time. We do some cool things like a CRM and other pieces to really help drive success there, but that'd be a great starting point.
Perfect. Well, thank you as always for your time. It was great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
The information contained in this podcast represents the host and guest's general opinions and should not be construed as personalized accounting and tax advice. Listeners should consider all facts and circumstances before applying this information and seek appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. Any info provided does not constitute accounting, tax, or legal advice.